Hey folks, it's time for the quote of the day, and I'm going to apologize. My throat is a little raw today, so it is what it is. I'm going to sound a little different today. I apologize for that. Today's quote of the day is going to come from a man that I've quoted before. Actually, I've used this quote before in something else, but I feel like it's important, and it is his birthday. Now, before I get to him, though, today had some pretty big birthdays that I'm passing over, but mostly because they are entertainers, but they're singers and songwriters that have had a profound effect not just on the world but on my life personally. Pat Benatar, Rod Stewart, and most importantly to me at least is Jim Croce was born today. Now, for those of you that don't know who Jim Croce is, I absolutely you need to go look him up. It's weird that I yesterday I quoted Joan Baez, who was instrumental in the folk music like surge of the 1960s, and Jim Croce was part of that. So the two of them were born within a day of each other. I think they're a couple years apart, but you get what I'm saying. They were born near each other. She was born on the 9th, he was born on the 10th, and they're both like folk music extraordinaires. Now he took obviously a different tack, if you will. Uh, he took a little bit more of a happier, not he wasn't necessarily a protest song singer and things like that. He was more of a folk singer that was about telling stories and things like that. But "Time in a Bottle" is without a doubt one of my favorite songs of all time, and I believe one of the greatest love songs ever written. Now, that's just to celebrate him for the day because I didn't want to pass him over. But today's quote of the day really needs to be about the man, and I need to talk to you about the man because today is the birthday of one of the most important scientists of the 20th century, and that is George Washington Carver. Now, I cannot tell you the story or give you information on George Washington Carver without making sure that you understand that George Washington Carver was black and was successful in what he did at a time when that was a near impossibility. At a time of extreme racial injustice, of extreme racial inequality, George Washington Carver, and I hate to use the term or use the word because of his last name, but carved out a path for himself that nobody else probably could have done. And he did it by recognizing what he was up against, by working hard in trying to prove his theories and forward understanding on what he was doing. Now, some of you would just think of George Washington Carver as the peanut guy. That's what a lot of people used to say when I was in school. Well, he's the peanut scientist. He did so much more than that. He did so much more than that. Yes, he was about crop rotation, he was about farming, but the ideas that he put forth weren't just about peanuts and things like that. These were alternate crops to cotton that allowed a farmer to grow basically year round, replenishing the soil, increasing their yield every single time, and making it so that they always had an income. It wasn't just as simple as, oh, he grows peanuts, good. That's what a lot of people boiled George Washington Carver down. And he did so much more than that. He was an artist. He was a speaker. He he did so much for not just science, which is important to me, but for black folks, especially back then. Like he really did. He it was important to him. Now we used terms back then. I don't. We, the royal we, America, used terms back then that were widely accepted. That today we don't use at all. Variations on the N word and things like that that were commonplace, and he became well versed in how to use these words for maximum impact. Now, it's important to understand that his farming techniques and the things that he put forward as far as environmentalism and things like that, they weren't just for black folks. They weren't just for black farmers. That's what created a whole new understanding. In rural areas all over America, there are still repercussions and ripples felt from George Washington Carver's science. I know that most of us think of rural farming areas and we think, oh, well, that's a hotbed for racism. And in some cases it is. But in a lot of places, the ideas that George Washington Carver put forward are in play right now. And there are black farmers next to white farmers. And a lot of people in big cities and things like that don't understand this part of America. But George Washington Carver basically built that. He the science that he put forward came out of the Tuskegee Institute, which is a black college. And so he literally had to bring that knowledge. He had to bring that science not just to black farmers, but to white farmers as well. And when he did that, it created a bridge. It created a bridge that we really honestly, I doubt we would have had. He brought this country together in places that, historically speaking, there was never a reason for them to have come together. They would have stayed in their shells. They would have stayed as racist as they ever were. But because of the efforts that he made to try to bring, no, I mean, there, like, I'm not saying it was always altruistic. There was money involved here, right? Like, he taught these white farmers how to cycle their crops effectively, how to make more money. And that hit them in their feels. Like they were like, "Oh, hey, maybe this N word isn't so bad." And so they started to accept more N words. And that, I mean, I'm using those terms. I'm using that because that's how they thought. That's how they spoke. And we want to be sure that we understand that. Because at some point in time, they stopped thinking that way, and they stopped being that way, and they stopped talking that way. And I think that none of that happens without George Washington Carver. Now, as far as the quote of the day goes, there really isn't. There is, when you understand everything that he's done, everything that he did for both black and white farmers, and you understood that it came from a place of true compassion, this quote means so much more. George Washington Carver once said, "How far you go in life depends on your being tender with the young, compassionate with the aged, sympathetic with the striving, and tolerant of the weak and strong. Because someday in your life, you will have been all of these." I'm going to read that again. How far you go in life depends on your being tender with the young, compassionate with the aged or aged, sympathetic with the striving, and tolerant of the weak and strong. Because someday in your life, you will have been all of these. Look, you don't have to be a genius like George Washington Carver was. You don't have to be, extra special to understand what he's talking about here. He's talking about the idea that we all go through this life. And yeah, the things that we experience, if you're a city folk or a country folk, or if you're a Republican or a Democrat, or you're whatever it may be, the things that your perspective and the way that you look at this world, they vary widely. But what doesn't vary is the fact that at some point in everyone's life, they're going to need help. They're going to need somebody that is tender and kind and sympathetic. They're going to need somebody that is there with them. They're going to need all of these things. They're going to need someone who's tolerant when they're weak. They're going to need somebody who is sympathetic when they're just trying to get by. They're going to need somebody that is tender and compassionate because they're struggling. This is a universal truth. And this is what brings us together. At the end of the day, no matter how we view the world, no matter what our perspective is, the human condition is what it is. And we will all suffer in the same ways, and we will all strive in many of the same ways, and we will all try to understand what it means to be here and what it means to be alive. Now, I could talk for an hour and a half about George Washington Carver, what he did, and his quotes. Trying to fit it all into 10 minutes is a Herculean effort that I don't think I've done a very good job of, honestly. But if you have the time, go look him up. Go read about him. Go understand who he was as a man, and go understand exactly why he did what he did. I think that it's important. And I think that you, once you understand it, will find it as important as I do. Take care of yourself. Take care of others. Happy birthday to George Washington Carver. I'll talk to you all very soon.